that is being scientifically proven. The other aspect of it, which we don't believe will ever be proven, would be the concept that human beings evolved from a common ancestor with the apes. Right? We don't believe that will ever be proven. That human beings were human beings from the time that they were created. And that the concept, because fundamentally the concept that human beings were created from a common ancestor or have a common ancestor with apes forms the basis of questioning even the existence of God.
As a matter of interest, would the theory of evolution would it be possible to teach it in Islamic university?
Well, it is taught. They are taught. It is taught as a theory,
right.
But at the same time, the other approach, which is that of special creation, is also presented. That the fossil record indicates the arrival of species at various stages of the fossil, the Earth's development, without any intermediary forms. Coming in mass, in fully developed, and all these different things. All of this seems to point towards the concept of special creation.
So, in fact, the result of what you say seems to be that there is, in fact, at least in reference to human beings, what one could loosely call an Islamic science, in addition to an Islamic faith.
Well, fundamentally, in Islam, science is not looked at as being something existing outside of Islam. Meaning that if Islam is from God, and nature was created by God, then the laws of science would not contradict God's revelation, because they're from the same source. So, Muslim scientists, have been known, in the ancient times as being very leading scientists, there were no issues of burning people at the stake because of their scientific theories or what they proposed. This never took place in Islamic history. Science has always existed side by side with Islamic teachings, that the scientists were themselves scholars within the Islamic faith.
What I'm thinking of is this, that within Christian traditions, there has been a tendency in the face of science to interpret Scripture as a metaphor. You're familiar with what I'm talking about. So that people will say, yes, well, there's the account of the creation and so forth in Genesis. But we see that as compatible with whatever science tells us. Because whatever the way it happened according to science is simply a literal description, if you like, of what we see metaphorically described in Genesis. Would Islam go along with that, or would you jib at that?
No. We would hold that what God has described is real. That it is not a metaphorical explanation. No, this is the reality. What took place in the details of what took place before that, of course, God only knows. God, in explaining the process of creation, etc., has given certain aspects. What you don't find in the Quran is the kind of details that you may find in the Bible that then become questionable from the scientific point of view. How could that be? How could these questions arise? What you find in the Quranic presentation is the broad outlines, the general principles. But the concept, though, of Adam and Eve being created, Muslims don't question that this is a metaphorical explanation for the beginning of man, but that God actually created Adam and Eve as human beings when He first created them.
In the way it's laid out I'm not quite sure what the Quran says, but something like the way it's set out in Genesis.
Yeah, they were created from the elements of the earth.
Right.
And their own traditions in Islam, and I used to know they do it And do you say how those arose?
Well, fundamentally, there exists really one Islam. Fundamentally, there exists one Islam. And there have been, from the time of the final revelation, elements that have splintered off. Okay? And they represent a small, though sometimes very vocal minority. And Ayatollah Khomeini, which I guess everybody knows about, and Iran represents that the largest of those small elements. I mean, they represent at most 10% of the Muslim world. But due to their political influence in this time, they seem to represent the voice, to some degree, of what Islam is in the world today. I mean, when people are talking about Islam, they're talking about Khomeini and what Khomeini said, what he did, his rulings, and this type of thing. Whereas, in fact, from an Islamic point of view, they represent a very small voice, and they're looked at as a deviation from the main teachings. Those main teachings which I spoke of the uniqueness of God and His attributes. When you look at the teachings of Shiaism, because this is what Khomeini represents, the leader of Shiaism, their belief is that there were 12 individuals. One, Ali, who was a cousin of the Prophet, who was married to his daughter, and 11 of his grandchildren, out of many who he had, are defined. This group of 12 are referred to as the 12 Imams. And they are looked at as possessing some of the attributes of God. Among them, omniscience, that they knew the past, present, and the future. Among them, absolute infallibility, that they never committed any errors, no wrongs. They were totally free of any kind of error, even in thought. And they are looked at as having omnipotence, as having control over the very elements of the universe itself. So this, and anyone who would hold that belief, even if he was from the main body of Muslims, if somebody pops up saying he believes that this individual, this human being, has these qualities, immediately the Muslim world would say, no, this person has left Islam. This cannot be a Muslim. It's totally unacceptable, because it strikes at the very foundation of the faith. And the other splinter groups, smaller than this one, are the Baha'i faith, which eventually became its own religion, the smaller break-off, which broke off from Shiaism, and Qadianism, or Ahmadiyism as it's known today. There was an individual in India called Mirza Ghulam Ahmed who claimed that he was a prophet of God. And of course, once you claim that, as I said, basic principle of Islamic belief, once you claim you're a prophet, you just claim that you left Islam. So they're not looked at, in any way, shape, or form as being a part of Islamic faith.
And the Sufi, are they?
No, Sufi doesn't represent another sect of Islam. Where among them, Sufism represents what we may call quote-unquote mysticism within the Islamic body of the Islamic world. Where the elements among them believe that human beings are themselves pieces of God, right? And this is sort of shared by the mystical elements, outside of whether it was in Christianity or others. Plato himself spoke about this in the Symposium. The idea that human beings are pieces of God, and that our goal is to realize that we are these pieces of God, and to find ways in this life to reunite back with God. This represents a belief which takes a person out of the mainstream of Islam. And what you find is that those who hold these beliefs will then identify certain members of this particular order